United States provides crucial support to liberate Cuba. The situation in Cuba reaches a critical point as hundreds of people take to the streets in Santiago de Cuba, in the east of the island, to protest against prolonged blackouts and food shortages. These demonstrations, reflecting the deep discontent of the population, have drawn international attention, with the United States expressing solidarity and support for the Cuban people in their struggle for freedom. From the U.S. Department of State, any accusation of interference in the protests has been rejected, calling them absurd. Instead, the desperate situation facing the Cuban population has been highlighted, with blackouts lasting up to 13 hours a day and a chronic shortage of food and basic resources. The U.S. Embassy in Havana has been summoned by Cuban authorities to express their rejection of what they consider to be interference messages from the U.S. government. However, Washington insists on the legitimate right of the Cuban people to peacefully express their concerns and demands. In the midst of this crisis, the United States call to the Cuban government is clear: to stop violence and unjust detentions, and to respect citizens' fundamental right to freedom of expression and assembly. Additionally, the need for the Cuban government to take steps towards democratization and respect for human rights is emphasized as a fundamental step in addressing the urgent needs of its population. The energy situation in Cuba has deteriorated further in recent months due to fuel shortages, exacerbating the already chronic power outages. This crisis, combined with economic difficulties and the COVID-19 pandemic, has led the island to a humanitarian emergency. In response to all this, the Cuban president expressed himself through social media. Mediocre politicians and terrorists on social media aligned themselves from South Florida to heat up the streets of Cuba with interference messages and calls for chaos. They were left wanting. He wrote on social media, "We will not tire of fighting against the genocidal blockade or of explaining to the people the causes of the problems and the government's efforts to move the economy forward," he added later. In this context, U.S. support presents itself as a crucial element in Cuba's political and social landscape. As the Caribbean country faces these multiple challenges, international solidarity and diplomatic pressure could play a decisive role in the path towards freedom and prosperity for the Cuban people.